You ever get that feeling, that chill down your spine, when you just know something's coming, like the universe is about to drop a bomb right on your doorstep? I'll tell you, there are a lot of things I've seen in my life, standoff after standoff, adrenaline-fueled chases, and the weight of those quiet, tense moments when you know you're on the edge of something big. But this was different. It was the day the animal control van rolled up to my house. It wasn't the typical slow roll you'd expect from some routine check, no. This one was deliberate, heavy with purpose, almost as if the van itself had been summoned, its wheels moving with authority. It wasn't just a van, it was like an omen, a dark cloud rolling in, and I could feel it. That long, slow roll, the officer stepping out of the van, looking official with his clipboard, sunglasses hiding whatever expression he was wearing. He walked up the driveway like he was on a mission, head held high, moving with that deliberate kind of confidence that usually precedes something serious. His eyes scanned the surroundings like he was about to uncover some hidden truth. I didn't even have to look twice to know he wasn't here for a checkup. He was here for something else, something more significant. And standing there, on the porch, was Duke, my old German shepherd, as calm as ever, sitting like he owned the place. A seasoned veteran of service, his posture perfect, the canine vest gleaming in the afternoon sun like a badge of honor. He wasn't just some dog. He was a living legacy of every case we'd worked together, every life we'd touched. The officer stopped in his tracks when he saw him. Duke wasn't your average dog, after all. No, he was a walking, breathing reminder of years of service, every inch of him saying, "I'm not just a pet, I'm a protector." The officer froze halfway up the steps. For a second, he wasn't even sure where he was, like his whole world had paused, recalculating everything. He looked at Duke, he looked at me, and then his confidence crumbled, just like that. The serious demeanor he wore evaporated, the cocky stride he had before, gone. It was like he suddenly realized he had no idea who a Waith was dealing with. The officer's voice cracked a little as he spoke. "Sir, I'm responding to several complaints about a dangerous and aggressive dog at this address," he said, his eyes flicking nervously between Duke and me. He didn't seem angry or determined anymore. He looked confused, like he was wondering if he had just walked into the wrong house or if he was being set up. You could almost hear the wheels turning in his mind. Was this some kind of prank? I mean, here he was, standing in front of the most chilled-out dog you could ever meet, a dog who could teach meditation to a monk, and yet he had the word aggressive hanging in the air like a bad joke. And Duke? He just sat there, as calm as a Sunday morning, not even a twitch of his ear. Every bit the professional he'd been for all those years, showing the officer what real control looked like. The officer's confusion deepened. I could tell he wasn't sure what to make of it. "Let me guess," I said, keeping my voice light, knowing exactly where this was coming from. "Karen Richardson, right?" The officer didn't answer, but the silence between us was loud enough to speak volumes. I could see it in his eyes, the recognition. The realization that yes, this whole mess had started with her. And just like that, the stage was set. We weren't dealing with a simple misunderstanding. We were dealing with someone who had made it her mission to bring trouble to my doorstep. And now it was time to set the record straight. I'm James Harrison, a retired cop. 20 years of chasing chaos, putting criminals behind bars, and cleaning up messes in every corner of this state. I'd seen it all. And frankly, I was tired. All I wanted now was peace, a quiet life. That's why Duke and I ended up here, in Maplewood Estates. I'd done my time in the trenches, and now I was looking for a neighborhood that lived up to its name place, where the most excitement I'd see was a couple of kids playing in the yard, or maybe someone trimming their hedges a bit too much. A neighborhood where I could kick back, enjoy the calm, and leave the mess of the world behind. The house was perfect on paper. A quiet street lined with trees, neat little houses with white picket fences. The kind of place where you could almost hear the birds chirping in perfect harmony, where the biggest drama of the week was whether someone's grass grew a little too long. But it wasn't long before I realized something was off. No, it wasn't the houses or the lawns or even the quiet. It was Karen Richardson. And let me tell you, Karen wasn't your typical neighbor. She was the HOA president, a role she took as seriously as a general would lead an army. Picture this, a petite woman in a pastel cardigan, with a voice that could shatter glass if you crossed her. And from the moment we moved in, she had her eyes on Duke. Never mind that Duke had the calm demeanor of a seasoned professional, the kind of dog who'd sit through a storm without batting an eye. To Karen, Duke wasn't a former K9 officer. He was a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. It didn't matter to her that Duke had spent 8 years serving the community, saving lives, sniffing out criminals, and helping kids. No, to Karen, all she saw was a big dog, a potential threat to her little perfect world. She would cross the street with her tiny Pomeranian clutched in her arms like some kind of shield, glaring at Duke as if he were about to pounce. The irony? Duke wasn't about to do anything. He'd barely even glance her way. He was too busy keeping his eyes on me, waiting for the next command. But that didn't stop Karen from getting a bee in her bonnet. Every time she saw us, she'd cross the street with that intense, judgmental stare, convinced that Duke was somehow the worst thing that ever happened to Maplewood Estates. That's when the snide comments started, little barbs on our morning walks. She would mutter under her breath as we passed. Drama cranked up to 11, and it wasn't just her. The HOA complaints started rolling in. First, it was about Duke barking at night. The thing is, Duke wasn't the type to bark unless there was something important to alert me to, and even then, it was controlled. But Karen wasn't listening to reason. She was on a mission that didn't involve facts or truth, only her perception of the way things should be. Karen Richardson wasn't just your garden variety neighborhood watchwoman. She was the self-appointed guardian of order, the enforcer of all things perfect in Maplewood Estates. And if she didn't like something, everyone in town would know about it. Being the HOA president wasn't just a title for her, it was a full-time job, a responsibility that she took so seriously it might as well have been a political office. She didn't just enforce rules, she lived by them, breathed them, and imposed them like a general on the battlefield. From the moment we moved in, I could tell that Karen had a very particular vision for the neighborhood, a vision that didn't include big dogs like Duke. It didn't matter that he was a retired police K9, a decorated veteran with a stack of medals and a lifetime of service behind him. To Karen, Duke's size and breed were the only things that mattered. It didn't take long before I started to feel her eyes on us. It wasn't just a casual glance. It was more like a laser focus. Every time Duke and I went for a walk, Karen would appear, crossing to the other side of the street, clutching her tiny Pomeranian like it was some kind of fragile treasure. The little dog yapped non-stop, and I could tell from the way Karen held it that she was ready for any confrontation. But Duke, he didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. His eyes stayed on me, like he knew his place, and wasn't about to entertain the drama unfolding in front of him. To him, Karen was just another distraction. But Karen, she wasn't having it. It started with small comments under her breath, like she was just trying to get under my skin. The kind of remarks that might seem harmless at first, but were calculated to do just that: irritate. "That dog's too big for this neighborhood," she'd mutter as we passed her, her voice tight with barely contained disapproval. I ignored it at first, but it didn't stop there. Soon, the complaints began to surface. First, it was a formal complaint to the HOA about Duke barking at night. Now, anyone who knew anything about police dogs knew that barking wasn't their first instinct. They were trained to remain calm, to stay silent unless absolutely necessary. And Duke, he was the epitome of calm. He could sleep through a thunderstorm without even twitching an ear. But Karen wasn't swayed by the facts. She was convinced that Duke was a menace, and no amount of reason was going to change her mind. That's when I knew this wasn't going to end quietly. But I wasn't about to back down either. I had something better than words, I had proof. Then came the second complaint. This one took things to another level. Karen had claimed that Duke was chasing kids in the park. Now, any sensible person who knew Duke would laugh at this. This dog wouldn't hurt a fly. But still, the accusations came, and Karen wasn't about to give up. I'd had enough by this point, and so had the neighbors. They'd seen Duke with the kids in the park, Tom's kids, Sarah's kids, and even the grumpy old man from next door, Mr. Peterson. Duke wasn't chasing anyone. He was lying under a tree, surrounded by laughing kids, playing fetch with them, patiently letting them climb all over him like he was their personal jungle gym. It was the kind of thing that would melt anyone's heart, but not Karen's. No, she wasn't satisfied with the truth. She'd already made up her mind, and nothing was going to change that. So she doubled down. Karen started lurking around the edges of my property, snapping pictures of Duke, doing her best to catch him doing something wrong. But the thing was, Duke wasn't the type of dog to make a scene. He didn't react to Karen's provocations. He just stared at her, unbothered, as if she were no more important than a tree or a rock in the yard. I could see it every time she tried to rile him up, making sudden movements or yelling at him from the street. Duke would barely blink, as if to say, "This is beneath me," but Karen wasn't one to let go. She kept going, trying to provoke him into doing something that she could use against him. But Duke just sat there, calm as could be, and I could see that Karen was getting frustrated. It was like a game to her now, and she wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. Things came to a head one Tuesday afternoon, and let me tell you, it was nothing short of a showdown. I was just grabbing the mail, Duke by my side, when I saw her walking toward me, face flushed red with anger. Princess, her tiny Pomeranian, was yapping away in her arms like it had something to prove. As Karen got closer, I could feel the tension building. "That beast of yours has got to go," she practically shouted, her voice rising with each word, ensuring that everyone within a 5-block radius could hear. This is a family neighborhood, not a training ground for attack dogs. I didn't flinch. I just kept sorting through my mail, taking my time. I knew what was coming. "Duke's a retired police K9, I said, keeping my voice steady, calm. "He served this community for 8 years. He's earned his retirement." But Karen wasn't having any of it. "Aggressive breeds have no place here," she snapped, eyes narrowing. "The HOA rules are clear. No threats to residents." I looked at her, unamused, trying to remain as calm as Duke was at my side. "He's never hurt a soul, and you know it." I could see the vein popping in her neck as she glared at me, the anger practically radiating off her. "We'll see about that," she hissed. "I'm taking this to the authorities. Maybe animal control will see what a menace he really is." And with that, she turned and stormed off, the scent of her perfume lingering in the air, like a warning shot. It was only 3 days later when animal control showed up. Officer Williams was a nice guy, but I could tell he was uncomfortable from the moment he stepped out of his van. He had that look, like he didn't want to be here, but he had to be. He explained that Karen had filed complaints, claiming that Duke was terrorizing the neighborhood. I didn't argue. I knew exactly why he was here, and I was more than happy to show him Duke's records, everything from his K9 certifications to service photos, to a letter from the mayor. As Williams flipped through the paperwork, his expression went from neutral to impressed. I could see the surprise on his face as he realized exactly what Duke was, a living legend. When Williams tossed a ball for Duke to fetch, the old dog didn't hesitate. He waited for my signal and then picked up the ball, trotting back to me, tail wagging politely. "This is impressive," Williams said, shaking his head. "Your dog's got a resume most humans would envy." He then added, more to himself than to me, "Someone filed a false report on a government service animal. That's a serious charge. Could be criminal, especially if it's harassment." I didn't say anything, just glanced out the window. There, on her driveway, stood Karen, watching. She probably thought she'd see Duke carted off in a cage, but instead, she got a front row seat to her own downfall. Williams made a few calls from his van, and before long, 2 squad cars pulled up, sirens off but lights flashing. The officers got out, and I could tell by the look on their faces that they were none too happy. They were friends of mine from the force. "We need to talk to the complainant," Officer Bradley said, shaking his head. "False claims about a K9? Not on our watch." I nodded. This was about to get interesting. They walked straight toward Karen's house. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. All I had to do was watch Karen's face go from smug satisfaction to full-on panic. The officers were showing her something on their tablets, and it wasn't good. It was the footage of her harassing Duke. Trying to provoke him, throwing stuff into my yard, banging on the fence, all of it caught on video. And Duke? He just kept on being Duke, calm, collected, and completely unbothered. The color drained from Karen's face as she saw the evidence laid bare. Bradley handed her a stack of papers, and when I looked closer, I saw the fine print. She was hit with a 5-0 fine for filing false reports on a service animal. There was a cease and desist order for harassment, and the cops warned her that any further nonsense would land her in serious legal trouble. It was the moment she knew she'd lost. The moment the officers started making their calls, I knew things were about to escalate. There was a certain way the whole scene shifted, the serious tone in their voices, the subtle exchange of glances between them. This wasn't just a simple animal control visit anymore. This was becoming a real issue, one that had implications well beyond the neighborhood drama Karen had tried to stir up. The weight of it hit me when I saw the squad cars pull up, one after the other, their flashing lights briefly illuminating the street before they turned them off. The officers got out with a purposeful stride, and I knew immediately that they weren't here for a friendly chat. These were guys I'd worked with before, and they didn't look pleased. They were friends, not just colleagues. They were the kind of guys you trusted to have your back, the kind who wouldn't let something like this slide. "We need to talk to the complainant," Officer Bradley said, his voice low but with an edge that told me everything I needed to know. "False claims about a K9? Not on our watch." It wasn't just about enforcing the rules now. This was personal, at least for them. They knew Duke. They knew the kind of dog he was, and they sure as hell weren't going to let some petty neighbor turn his legacy into something it wasn't. I gave a slight nod as they walked off, heading straight for Karen's house. Watching them go, I could tell that this wasn't going to be just another tense conversation. They weren't asking for Karen's side of the story anymore. They were about to put her in her place, and I wasn't going to have to lift a finger. I couldn't hear what was happening next door, but I didn't need to. I watched as Karen's smug expression slowly started to melt away. I saw her pacing at the edge of her driveway, her arms crossed tightly across her chest, eyes darting between the officers and the street. The usual air of superiority she carried with her was starting to fade, replaced by something else. Was it worry, fear, maybe a little bit of both? Her stance stiffened when Bradley pulled out his tablet and began showing her something, probably the footage of her harassing Duke, the footage that was going to bury her. It was clear from the way Karen's face changed that she wasn't prepared for this. I could almost feel her sinking into the realization that her little scheme was falling apart right before her eyes. The confidence that had fueled her every complaint, every attempt to get Duke removed, evaporated. She started shifting nervously, glancing around, like she was trying to figure out her next move, but it was already too late. Bradley wasn't here to discuss anything. He was here to make it clear that she had messed with the wrong dog, the wrong man, and the wrong neighborhood. As she watched herself on the tablet trying to provoke Duke, throwing objects into my yard, banging on the fence seat, was like she was seeing herself for the first time, and the reflection wasn't pretty. I could practically hear her mental gears grinding as she processed what was happening. Her face went pale, like all the blood had drained out of her body, and her mouth worked as if she were trying to find the words to explain herself. But there was no explanation, not anymore. All the attempts to paint Duke as some kind of danger evaporated with each piece of evidence they showed her. She was caught. In that moment, it was all over for Karen. Bradley handed her a thick stack of papers, official papers, the kind you don't just brush off, and I knew what it meant. She was in deep trouble. Later, I would learn that she'd been slapped with a hefty 5-0 fine for filing false reports about a service animal, a fine that would sting far more than any of the complaints she'd made about Duke. But the icing on the cake was the cease and desist order for harassment. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The officers had already warned her. Any further nonsense, any more attempts to drag Duke's name through the mud, and she'd be facing criminal charges. It was a sobering thought, but I could tell from the way she stood there, arms still tightly folded, that she wasn't ready to accept it. But she didn't have a choice. It was done. The neighborhood knew the truth now, and the consequences of her actions were about to come crashing down. I glanced out the window, catching a glimpse of Karen as she stood there, completely deflated, no longer the powerful HOA president she once was. She was a shell of that persona now, caught in the wake of her own bad decisions. It was hard not to feel a little bit of satisfaction watching her unravel, knowing that Duke had stood his ground with nothing but the truth on his side. As the officers walked back toward their squad cars, I caught a final look at Karen. Her expression had shifted from defiance to desperation. She was mumbling to herself, words I couldn't quite catch, probably trying to justify it all in her mind. But I knew it was over. She had no leg to stand on. Word spread quickly in Maplewood. By the time the sun set that day, the whole neighborhood had heard what had happened. There were whispers in the yards, people talking over fences, their voices full of disbelief mixed with something else, relief, maybe. People who'd been on the fence about Duke suddenly found themselves backing him, backing me. The HOA didn't waste time calling an emergency meeting, but even they knew that the damage was done. They couldn't ignore the facts. Karen's reputation was already tarnished beyond repair. At the meeting, neighbors stood up one by one, telling their stories, each one more damning than the last. Tom played videos of his kids laughing and playing with Duke in the yard, showing just how harmless the big dog was. Sarah spoke up next, telling everyone how Duke had alerted her when her father, who had dementia, wandered off one evening. She described how Duke had led her straight to him, saving him from walking into traffic. Even Mr. Peterson, the grumpy old man who had lived in Maplewood for as long as anyone could remember, called Duke the best dog he'd ever met. I could tell by the look on Karen's face that she was hearing something she never thought she'd hear, people actually standing up for the dog she'd tried so hard to villainize. But it was Maria Gonzalez who truly stole the show. She was a mother who lived a few blocks away, and she'd driven all the way here just to speak. Her voice trembled as she began to tell the story of her missing daughter. She described how Duke had tracked her little girl for 16 hours, through rain and mud, never giving up until he found her, alive and well, in an abandoned cabin. It was a powerful moment. You could feel the entire room hold its breath as Maria spoke, her eyes brimming with tears as she reached down to hug Duke, who responded with a soft thump of his tail against the floor. "This dog is a hero," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. And with those words, it was like the room erupted. The applause was deafening, and people stood to their feet. The tension that had been hanging in the air for weeks melted away in that moment. Duke was a hero. He had always been one. The vote to remove Karen as HOA president was swift and unanimous. The only one who didn't vote for her removal was Karen herself. She sat there, looking stunned, holding on to her papers like they were a lifeline, mumbling about protecting the community, but no one was listening. The neighbors had already made up their minds. The damage was done. As Karen stood to leave, the room erupted into applause once again, this time for Duke. I could feel the pride swelling in my chest as I nudged Duke, urging him to do his little bow, the trick he'd learned when he first graduated from K-9 school. And to my surprise, Duke did it. He did his little bow, just like old times, and the room erupted into even more applause. The whole neighborhood was cheering for him, for the dog that had been through so much and had only ever given back. It felt like a victory not just for Duke, but for everything he'd done for this town. And as for Karen, well, she stormed out, her heels clicking angrily against the floor as she left, and the doors closed behind her with a sense of finality. That was the last anyone saw of her. She'd picked the wrong fight, and the entire neighborhood had watched as she lost it. So, that's how Duke went from being the supposed menace of Maplewood Estates to the hero of the neighborhood. And as for me, I got to keep enjoying my retirement, side by side with the best partner I'd ever had. Duke still naps on the couch, soaking up attention on our walks, and keeping a lazy eye out for any trouble that might come our way. It's funny, you know. The truth always has a way of coming out. And in the end, it was the truth that set us free. I couldn't be prouder of Duke and of the community that finally saw him for what he truly was.